As in the late film tonight, as a US Marshal prepared to take on all comers in his quest for justice. The lawman rides at 11:30. Another hustings edition of Question Time. Before that on BBC One with David Dimbleby.
Good evening and welcome to the last of these special hustings editions of Question Time, in which people have come from all over the country with all opinions to talk to the leaders of the main parties, tonight with Tony Blair, leader of the Labour Party. And the first question for him comes from Karen Haywood, who's a trainee legal executive from Derby. Karen Haywood.
You seem so intent on cultivating the middle-class Middle England vote. Don't you think you're in danger of losing your traditional supporters?
I would say two things to you. The first is that I've been in Parliament now for 14 years. Every single one of those years has been spent in opposition. I've seen the poll tax be introduced, I've seen the undermining of the health service, I've seen the growth of social division in Britain, I've seen the wipeout of a third of our manufacturing base, I've seen 14 years in which the Conservatives have been governing this country, 18 years in all. I have to say to you, I make no apology at all for making sure that the Labour Party reaches out and builds new support. Because if we can't build that new support, we can't do anything for any of those people that have supported us over all those years. And I represent a constituency in the northeast of England, which, if you like, is what people would call a traditional Labour constituency. They know perfectly well that if I can't get out there and reach and build new support, I can't do anything for those that I represent. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is this. We are offering those who have been traditional supporters of the Labour Party a very great deal in this election. For example, we are the only political party putting forward a proper programme for youth and long-term unemployment. The windfall tax on the privatised utilities, the excess profits there, to fund that £3 billion programme over the lifetime of the Parliament to get young people off benefit and into work. Or you would look at our education proposals to reduce class sizes for 5-, 6- or 7-year-olds, or the proposals we have in the National Health Service, or on crime, or for pensions. These are all things that are going to bring benefit, not just to traditional supporters, but to those around the country. I'll just say one other thing to you as well, though. You see, I think it's to play the Conservative game, to say the Labour Party simply represents those people that are poor and disadvantaged or unemployed, and the Conservatives represent the rest. That's not the true divide in British politics. The true divide is between a Labour Party today that represents the decent, hard-working majority of people in this country, and a Conservative Party that's there for the privileged few. Now, that is why I created New Labour. I did it, it was difficult, it was painful often, but it was absolutely necessary. Because if you come into politics to get something done, and for 14 years I've been a sayer, not a doer, then you have to have a political party capable of achieving power. So I have to say to you, with the greatest respect, I don't apologise for creating New Labour as a party that can govern this country. I am proud of it.
Okay. Karen Haywood, does that answer your question? What did you have in mind exactly?
Just that the Labour Party seems to be very close to the Conservative Party. There doesn't seem to be a way of distinguishing between the two.
But you see, Karen, if I can just say to you, I mean, just take the example of that windfall tax there to fund the unemployment programme for young people. Supposing we were able to get 250,000 young people off benefit and into work over the lifetime of the Parliament, which is our commitment. I mean, that would be a dramatic indication of how much we were trying to heal the wounds in society, the fractures in our society, and bring the country further together. Supposing we were able to extend educational opportunity to those that don't have it at the moment, and reduce class sizes for all the 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds in the country to 30 or under. Now, that would be doing something. That's a big difference from the Conservatives. All the way through there are differences, but, you know, I suppose the differences fall into a different category from the differences, say, of 30, 40 years ago. And this is why today's Labour Party has changed, because I want the Labour Party, for example, to be a party that's committed to enterprise and to business. And I'm proud of the fact, again, that there are business people today who find themselves perfectly happy and at home in the Labour Party. But I think the vast majority of them, and I hope you, understand that it's possible to build a society where there's ambition and aspiration, but some sense of compassion and decency and obligation for others, and that's all we're trying to do.
Okay. Yes, the man in the grey tie there.
Mr. Blair, you may have changed, but your party hasn't. Where have we heard from Margaret Beckett? Where have we heard from John Prescott, from Rodney Bickerstaff? All these people, they've been keeping quiet during the duration of the election campaign. They're not going to stay quiet after the 1st of May, should you become elected leader. They've been working out their policies for 14 years. And they're as red socialist now as they have ever been. You may be the glossy, smart marketing. Your manifesto may look very nice, but you haven't changed your policies.
Well, sir, I have to say, I get the impression you're not 100% in support of us. But I want to say this to you, you know. I mean, first of all, you obviously haven't been watching television, indeed the BBC, quite as much as you should have. Otherwise, you'd have seen Margaret Beckett and John Prescott there many, many times. But I simply say this to you. I believe the threat and the danger to this country is not a new Labour government. It's another 5 years of a Conservative government. That is the threat to the people of this country, and I think they appreciate that and know it very well. Because that is the danger to our health service, to our pensions, to our schools, to our standard of living. And I think, with all due respect to you, that if you actually look at what has happened in Britain and the type of government we've had over this next few years, these last few years, then those very things the Conservatives have done over this period of time are precisely the reasons why many people in this country say enough is enough and it's time they went.
Let's have a question from Philip Burlinson, who's a print room manager from Bristol. Mr. Burlinson.
What guarantee, or more important, what insurances can Mr. Blair give us that unionists or unionist leaders will not bring the country back to the strikes and union unrest that we have seen under previous Labour governments?
The assurance I give you is this. The very reason why we changed the Labour Party was so that we could try and take this country forward. Now, the essential elements of the Conservative trade union legislation of the 1980s will stay. There's no going back to the days of secondary picket, secondary action, you know, all the rest of it, strikes without ballots. Those provisions will remain in place. But I really say to you that I think now we can start to move this country forward. The issue in British politics today should not be the old conflicts between bosses and workers. It should be how we get the investment in our people at the workforce, how we get partnership at the enterprise between employees and employers. There's no going back to the 1970s, but one of the reasons why, to go back to the question that was put to me there a few moments ago, one of the reasons why I wanted to create New Labour, change our relations with the trade unions as one part of that, is that I think this country has been crying out for a decent mainstream alternative to the Conservatives that isn't going to switch the clock back. We're not going to do that. You have my assurance on that. You know, we are going to take this country forward, and the things that we will concentrate upon is putting right what went wrong in the 1980s, not correcting those things that were.
Can you give the assurance, was the question, on behalf of union leaders that they won't bring the country back to the strikes and unrest that existed before? That was the point of your question.
Yes, but there will be no possibility of that happening because the laws that gave rise to that before have changed and we don't intend to alter them. But I may say to you as well, I think the vast majority of trade unionists in this country realise we've got to go forward, not backwards as well.
Okay. The man in the centre there with the striped blue and red tie on.
Yes.
You're only using you as a Trojan horse. You've got 101 members of the Tribune group who will be sitting behind you after the 1st of May if you get elected, and they haven't got the same agenda as you have.
Well, you know, this is the old Tory propaganda, but I have to say it's wearing a little bit thin, you know.
It's true.
Wearing, well, I know, but it is wearing a little bit thin. I mean, you know, people keep saying to me, oh, yes, well, Tony Blair believes that, but do the Labour Party believe that? First of all, I was elected leader of the Labour Party by the largest popular mandate of any leader of any political party. Number two, when we rewrote our party constitution to put a commitment to enterprise and the private sector along our aside our commitment to social justice and decent public services, we put it to our membership 90% in support. Then last year, we did another thing, a first. We put our draft manifesto programme to our party members in a ballot. Now, frankly, sir, I can't imagine the Conservative Party putting their manifesto to a ballot of their members, to a ballot of their members of parliament, or even, frankly, to a ballot of their cabinet. Now, so I think we're in very good shape. New Labour is what we're running on. New Labour is what we will be.
Okay, the man in the second row.
In the early 1980s, you were saying that Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative Party were stomping all over the unions, and you were warning against the dangers of the Conservative government. Now you're saying, oh, the trade union legislation, yeah, that was okay. They didn't do so badly on the economy. But beware of a Conservative government if it comes in again. And the truth is, Mr. Blair, you would actually, in 5 years' time, if there was a Conservative government, tell us again that, yes, they did quite well. And I feel that you actually know that the Conservative government, the Liberal Democrats as well, have the same sort of aspirations as yourself. They all want equality. They all want people to do well. And yet you only offer aspirations and no policy, and you're...
I think you better...
U-turning. U-turning.
Let me say to you that if, you know, I can see an aspiring candidate there, and I welcome that. But can I just say to you, look, what people want of me is to say to them what I want to change and what I want to leave in place. Now, you know, I could go back over. Margaret Thatcher was a member of Ted Heath's government when Ted Heath was doing this, that, and the next. So there's no point. Let's just work out what's right and what's wrong. What's wrong with the present Conservative government is, for example, the education system, is, for example, what they're doing to the National Health Service, is a divided society, is what they've done to the industrial base, is what's happening to skills and technology within Britain. Now, you say we haven't put forward proposals on those things. We have.
But can we stick to trade unions? Because I'm sure these other things will come up.
Well, I wasn't sure whether he was sticking to trade unions or not.
Well,
frankly,
as you said, by a look on his face, he was making...
So I thought I might as well.
On the trade union point, what about the compulsory recognition of trade unions in shop floors where over 50% want it? Doesn't that, in effect, give power back to trade unions that they don't at present have, and you don't know how it would be wielded?
No, it puts power in the hands of union members. There's no going back to the closed shop. There's no going back to people being forced into trade unions, but people should have the right in a democratic society to join a trade union if they wish to. But the trade unions will be operating within the laws and the constraints that will forbid all those things that marked the past. And I do say to people, I mean, I know that the Conservatives will run these scares throughout the general election campaign, but I think that, you know, it is time to move this country's political debate forward.
The Scottish trade unions, when they met the other day, and I know you'll say that's nothing to do with the Labour Party, but they've still got on their list of things renationalising rail, secondary industrial action, opposition to privatisation, minimum wage at 4.42, all those things. They're still there in the trade union agenda, even if you say, well, we're going to reject
David, there is a word in the English language, and it's called no. And if people make demands upon me...
K-N-O-W, N-O.
Well, there's... N-O as well, if you don't mind. And, you know, if people make demands upon me that I think are wrong, then they'll be refused. Now, I don't think anyone could look at the way that I've led the Labour Party in the last 3 years and think that I'm pushover for the STUC or wherever else it is.
Okay, the man in the red shirt at the very back there.
Yes, sir.
Do you actually miss Arthur Scargill and his band of die-hard socialists?
You know that word I was searching for just a moment or two ago?
All right. The man with in the spectacles in the centre there.
Mr. Blair,
Yes, sir.
in 1983 in the debate in the House of Commons, you described the Trade Union Act of that year as scandalous and undemocratic and designed to render the trade union movement ineffective and inefficient. How would you describe that act now?
Well, I've just made it clear. I mean, this is what David and I went through, sort of, 10 rounds with the other evening.
So it's
but
no longer undemocratic and designed
No,
to
I've
render
said
the
to
trade
you that
union
what I
movement
think is
inefficient.
important is, and frankly, rather than reading out the old Tory Central Office brief, exercise a bit of imagination yourself. In the end, let's be clear the programme we're standing upon. It is right to leave in place that legislation that has overwhelming support and move this country's political debates on. And as I say, you could go back, well, you could go back, I don't know whether you've ever put this to him, you could go back and say to Margaret Thatcher, You closed more grammar schools than anybody else. You know, you could go back and say, you were a member of Ted Heath's government. You could go back to Mr. Major and say, well, Mr. Major, you used to support Scottish devolution. There's no point. Let's move this political debate on
So
and stand on the platform we're
You're refusing
doing.
to answer my question. How would you describe that act now?
But, sir, I've already just said to you, that will remain in place. Ballots before strikes. All the rest of it is there. Instead, what people will have is proper minimum standards at the workplace. And rather than going back over what was said 14 years ago, just focus your mind on what could happen in the next 5 years.
Describing the act as scandalous and undemocratic folly or hypocrisy?
Yes, but I've already said to you, we will keep the legislation in place.
Undemocratic 14 years ago. Surely it's scandalous and undemocratic
Look, I
now.
perfectly well appreciate why the Conservative Party would prefer to refight the political election campaign of 1983, but I'm on the one in 1987.
Okay, all right. He's given his answer, which is that it's there, and it's not going to change. Well, it may not satisfy you, but there you are.
Well, I'm sure it won't satisfy you, sir, but then I think the only thing that would satisfy you is the re-election of a Conservative government, but that won't satisfy me.
All right. Very briefly.
Well, speaking as the first member of the audience who obviously isn't a Tory party activist.
Yes.
I'd like to say I think the Tory party is completely out of touch with the British people on this one. I think trade unions are far more popular now than they have been for years and years, and I think it could be a vote winner for the Labour Party. And I think it is, to bring back some of the things that we do have on the agenda. And I keep... If the Tory party keep going on these battles of the past, I think they'll be seen for what they are, which are dinosaurs, and out of touch with the British people.
Right, let's take another question. Roy Allison, who's a retired Methodist minister from Devon. Mr. Allison.
Your manifesto says, for today's pensioners, Conservative policies have created real poverty. As you propose to increase the pension only in line with prices, how will that poverty be abolished?
Well, we put forward a number of different proposals to increase the share in prosperity of pensioners. And, I mean, you're right in saying we're going to inherit a situation where, because of the very tight position on public finances, there's a limit to what we can do. But I think the choice at the election will be very, very clear. The choice is between a Labour Party that is committed to the basic state pension as the foundation of pension provision, or a Conservative Party that is pledged to remove the state pension. Now, it's not just increasing the basic state pension in line with prices that is our policy. We've also put forward the proposal of cutting VAT on fuel, which will be of benefit to pensioners particularly, and those that are living in poverty and face difficulties every winter with their heating bills. In addition, we have proposals to put together the best provision of public and private sector to try and provide better pension provision for people in the future. Now, I know that there's a limit to what we can do and what we can promise. But I do say to you, if you look back over Labour governments in the past, we did pretty well by pensioners, and we will do well again. And as soon as we can, we will make sure that pensioners get the deal that they want. And I will do the very best by it.
Will you do better than keeping it in line with prices if you can? Is that the pledge you make, or is it just to keep it in line with prices?
That is the pledge that we make, just to keep it in line with prices. And I say that the reason for that, it was, of course, the Conservatives that broke the link with earnings. And that was done, and we inherit that situation now. And all the way through, what I've been anxious to avoid is making people promises and commitments that I cannot truly guarantee that I can keep to. So because of the difficulties that we will inherit, I have to limit my pledge to that. But in addition, there are the measures on the National Health Service that will be of enormous benefit to pensioners. There are the measures on crime, and, for example, halving the amount of time it takes to get juvenile offenders to court. This will also be of assistance to pensioners. But I'm not going to make a promise to pensioners or to anyone else that I cannot keep. Okay. But I believe that our proposals will be far better for pensioners than the proposals of the Conservative Party.
Roy Allison wants to come back on that.
Sure.
Yes, that's not very radical at all, is it? You're talking about a lump of money that you feel is limited. Surely what the pensioners are looking for is a radical review of the way in which the pension is calculated so that other things can be added in and increased so that they feel more secure. Now, we look to you for a more radical policy. That's not radical, that's simply saying, well, we'll add a bit if we can.
Well, Roy, I've got to try and operate within the situation that I'll inherit. And when you say you could do something more radical and add more on, I mean, all these things come in the end down to pounds, shillings and pence. And, you know, there are a lot of calls on government and government finances, and we've got to take all those things into account. Now, I say to you, we have done well by pensioners in the past. Labour governments have. They set up SERPs, they were instrumental in the basic state pension, you know, all these things that we have done. But I say this to you, I would love to be able to sit here and promise, you know, everyone extra money for this and that and the next thing. We are going to inherit a situation where the national debt has doubled, where borrowing has been allowed to get out of control by the Conservatives, and we are going to have to live within the means that we will inherit. But having said that, everything we can do, we will do. I've said that to pensioners, and I mean it. But the worst thing for me, or for you, would be for me to sit here and say to you, I can guarantee you this, that, and the next thing, if I know that that simply may not be the case. Right. But the commitments that we have given, I think, are the best commitments that are on offer in this general election from any political party, and they stand in sharp contrast to the Conservative proposals on pensioners. And we've also said, I may say, that we will look, for example, at how we deal with the problems of community care. You know, the difficulties many elderly people face when they have to sell up their own homes in order to pay for their nursing home costs. So we will do this in the best way we can. Well, you shake your head, and I understand the problem, but I am not going to make promises in this election that I cannot keep, not to you or to anyone else. I understand the frustration, but I must rest on that
point. Can I just
go
back on that one point, sure, please? And that is on the long-term care. It's years ago since the Labour Party said that they would make a full inquiry. Your policy in the manifesto is to set up a royal commission. Now, thousands and thousands of elderly, frail people will die before any new policy is brought forward. What we need is a more radical approach to these matters, and I believe that radical policies are available which may not cost more pounds in the end if proper minds are brought to this.
Well, right, but that's precisely why we want to proceed on the basis of consensus, not simply slapping down a series of proposals and say, you know, there it is, take it or leave it. I mean, the problem of community care is a deep-seated problem because people are living longer. There is a greater requirement for nursing home care. There is the interaction between the National Health Service, social services, community care. We've got to get this right. Now, in the end, I'm afraid, you've got to make up your minds as to who you trust to make these reforms. Ourselves, the Labour Party, that introduced the welfare state, or the Conservative Party that has spent 18 years undermining it. And the very problems that pensioners have today stem in many cases from what the Conservatives did over those 18 years. Now, I've said to you, I will do my best by Britain's pensioners, as previous Labour governments have done, but I'm not going to make promises to you that I can't keep.
You said today, and it caused some apparent anger in the Conservative Party, that the Conservatives were planning to abolish the state pension. Their manifesto says that they guarantee a pension at least equal to the current basic state pension increased in line with inflation. And the Prime Minister says that Labour hasn't a shred of evidence for suggesting we've damaged the state retirement pension. They know the contrary to be true. They know we've set out plans that would guarantee it many years ahead, but they repeat the charge again and again. It's a lie, and frankly, there's no other word you can justifiably use to describe what they've done on that issue.
Right, well, let me deal.
Do you withdraw what you've said today about the abolition of the state pension in view of what the Prime Minister said?
I do not withdraw a single iota of it. And let me explain exactly what the Conservative proposals are so that people are aware of the full danger of them. Their proposals are that they replace the state pension with a privately funded scheme. Now, they say that that will only apply to young people, but if you look at the small print of the press release that was put out when Peter Lilly announced these proposals, it says that they can, in time, bring older people into this scheme as well. In order to fund it, in part, young people, or all those in the scheme, will lose the tax relief on their pension contributions. They have never explained how they are going to build up a private fund big enough to replace the state pension in those decades' time. They've never explained that. There is a huge hole in their explanation of where this money comes from. And I say to people very seriously that the choice at this election is between a Labour Party that will build on the basic state pension as we can, and a Conservative Party that is pledged to get rid of the state pension, and your pension will not be safe with them, and people should understand that very clearly in this election.
So when they say they'll be guaranteed a pension at least equal to the current basic state pension, increased in line with inflation...
It's a private pension, they say.
It's for the young people entering the workforce, yes.
Yes, but this is a private pension. Now, they say they're going to guarantee that they'll make up any shortfall that there is, but where's this money going to come from? They've never explained it. And until they answer the questions about this, we will carry on pressing them on it. But I say to you, to people, pension provision is not safe with the Conservatives. And a lot of people remember, David, two things. One, a Conservative party that before the last election pledged that they would not put VAT on fuel and then did it in the budget straight after the election. And the second thing that people remember is the poll tax, which they said would be of enormous benefit to the people of this country, a mere administrative change in the financing of local government, and cause devastation. Now, the party of the poll tax and VAT on fuel is not the party that can be trusted with Britain's pensions.
Okay. We'll just take a... Thank you. We'll just take a couple more points on pensions, yes.
Well, my question is, Tony, why would undermining the rights of defendants help pensioners? I'm really outraged by the idea of a fast-track procedure for young offenders, and it sounds to me very much like the fast-track procedures for asylums that cause so much injustice. I lecture on children's rights, and it outrages me to hear that you can so flippantly remark about taking away young vulnerable people's rights.
I'm not taking away anyone's rights.
You are. Fast-track procedures. That is extremely dangerous in terms of giving people a fair trial. Yeah. These are very, very important democratic rights that we have, and I hope that we will continue to enjoy.
Just to remind people who may have just joined us, what you were saying was that halving the time that young offenders took to come to court, as I understand it, was a benefit to the pensioners.
Well, that is a benefit to people. You talked about
but you raised it in the context of the pension.
Exactly, but you talked of people's democratic rights. There is also a democratic right to live in peace, free from fear and hassle and abuse. And many people do in this society as a result of persistent juvenile offending. And I cannot see that it is in any way a transgression of young people's rights to hasten the time for persistent young offenders that it takes to get them from being charged to get them to court. And it really, we've got to tackle this problem. And if the Labour Party stands for those that are in a vulnerable position, then I tell you, it's some of the most vulnerable in our society who fear most from crime. And I know people on council estates, elderly people whose lives are made hell by this, and we have to tackle it.
Oh, no, hold on. I'm going to move on to another person. I'm sorry, you'll go. The woman in red there.
Going back to the reduction of domestic fuel that Mr. Blair mentioned, how is Mr. Blair going to prevent the EU from stopping this reduction? Because it's supposed to be harmonised throughout Europe, isn't it?
How are you going to get it down to 5%?
The Commission have no power to stop this. Now, it is true, you're quite right. You're probably referring to the stories recently, which have said that the Commission are going to object to this, but they've got no power to stop it. And we will do it. And they are going to have to put up with it. But they've got no power to stop it.
What about all the other ministers? I mean, surely
but they don't have to agree to that.
There'll be a vote, won't there? And they say no, you can't have it.
No, there won't be a vote. We are perfectly entitled to do it.
Is it going to happen in your July budget, straight away?
Gordon Brown has said that it will happen in the July budget.
You agree with him?
Yes, I do.
The woman with the red
You'd have had your story there if I said I didn't.
You never know.
I thought it was the case that you could lower it, but only to 5%, that the EU won't let you lower it further than 5%, and that there's a year, I think 2000 and something, where we've got to put VAT on fuel, on food, on children's clothes. Well, it's all in the Maastricht Treaty that we have to have VAT on all these things and harmonised throughout Europe.
No, your first point is absolutely right, that you can't reduce it below 5%. That's why we've said we'll reduce it to 5%. But your second point is not correct, no. There are no provisions for the indirect taxation to be harmonised across Europe, and indeed we would resist any such provisions.
Okay, let's take a question from Joan Harrison, who's a history teacher from Wigan.
If you agree with social justice, why aren't you prepared to increase the top rate of income tax to help the underprivileged and the less well-off?
Joan Hairsign, I should have said. I'm sorry, I wasn't wearing my spectacles. Mr. Blair.
Because I don't think that that would raise the money that people say, because I think it's important that people have an incentive to work hard and to do well. and because I don't think that the answer, for example, to the problems of youth unemployment is to take some money off those at the top and give a few more pounds in benefit to those at the bottom. I mean, the proposal that we've got for the windfall tax on the privatised utilities, the excess profits of the privatised utilities, that, I think, is a far better and far fairer way of doing it. And it will ensure that we do get those 250,000 young people off benefit and into work, and they'll be given a range of different options. It could be a job with a private sector employer, or it could be a proper skill or apprenticeship, not some Mickey Mouse scheme, but a proper skill or apprenticeship. And I think that is the best way to move this country forward. But, you know, we've also, there's another point on top rate tax. If you look what's happening all around the world, top rate marginal rates of tax are coming down. It's not just in Britain, they've come down all around the world, and we've got to, you know, we're in an internationally competitive situation, we've got to remain competitive there. I would like to see, however, Joan, if there is room for manoeuvre on tax, we've brought down high marginal rates of tax at the top, but there are many people in this country on low incomes who still face very high marginal rates of tax at the bottom, on low incomes. Now, I would like to see, if we have room for manoeuvre, a 10p starting rate of tax that would start to help those people on lower incomes.
Yeah, that's very commendable. But during the past 18 years, there are a lot of people who've been earning quite a lot of money, and I don't see why they shouldn't pay a little more if you get into power.
Yes, but you know, Joan, all the experience was under Labour governments and Conservative governments in the past, where there were very high marginal rates of tax, that those with the best accountants didn't pay them and others did. And, you know, you've just got to make a judgment. What is the best way forward? We've chosen the windfall tax as the best way of financing that programme. We think that's the right thing to do. And we are concerned to make sure, you know, I mean, let me try and put it to you in this way. I think it is good in Britain if people, by hard work and effort, can become wealthy and successful. I welcome that. I like that. I don't want to level down. I want to level up. But I would say to you that the best way that we can, you know, move the situation forward in the future is to try and do something for those people, either without work or who are facing very high marginal rates of tax at the bottom end. Now, the Conservatives will say they're going to abolish all inheritance tax and capital gains tax. It will cost you £4.5 billion. Half of the benefit of that would go to the wealthiest 5,000 families in the country. Now, that's their prescription. I say if that money's available, introduce the 10p starting rate of tax. And I think that's a better way of doing it.
You say that you don't want to put more tax on the rich. Who's going to pay the windfall tax? I mean, some people argue it's going to be paid in the end, because these are, many of them, companies that have been privatised up to 10 years ago, that it's going to be paid by pensioners who've got their money invested in those shares, that it's going to be paid by the employees who'll find their wages don't go up as much as they might, or it's going to be paid by the customers. I mean, somebody pays tax.
Well,
it's not companies that pay tax, it's people that pay tax.
Of course, but it's not going to be paid by the customers. I mean, the regulators have already indicated that there's no way that that can happen. The excess profits of the privatised utilities are there and are clear. I mean,
not just sitting in the bank account waiting for you to take
in some cases, the answer to that is that they do, in fact, have very large cash reserves. Look, you've got to decide what's the fairest way to do it. The alternative, David, is not to tackle youth and long-term unemployment at all. Now, one of the things that I find worries people most in this country, going around the country, is the degree to which we are developing what some people call a sort of underclass, cut off from society's mainstream, without hope, without opportunity. And look what's happened under the Conservatives as a result. Welfare builds up, benefit builds up, and then you don't have the resources you need for education, health, and all the rest of it. You've got to change that, and this is the fairest way to do it.
Let's just stick with the tax point which was raised, if we may. The man in the second row here.
I just wanted to say that you're going about the windfall tax, but coming back to employment, I'm sorry, but the thing is that is there going to be any more regulation of big business? Because a lot of businesses are making people redundant, even though they're making incredible profits. And I mean, obviously you can optimise everything towards economics, but at some point you have to start thinking about society as well. And I just think, you know, I mean, is there any point you're going to try and address these issues? I mean, the Conservatives keep saying, you know, we don't want to sort of regulate too much, but if you have no regulation whatsoever, then you optimise society completely towards finance and you forget about people. And I'm just wondering, like, will you try and control any of the sort of redundancies that are being made by companies that are earning incredible amounts of money? I mean, I think there isn't balance there, isn't there, at some point?
Well, there is a balance, but I don't think, quite honestly, you can start as a government trying to interfere with decisions that companies are taking. What you can do is things like, for example, you know, after consultation with business, you have a minimum pay threshold beneath which people don't fall. But I think I would say to you the most important thing in our country today and the best guarantee of people getting good work and a decent standard of living is to increase the employability of people within the labour market, their education, their skills, their ability to handle new technology. I mean, let's just face it and be honest about it. You're not going to go back to a situation where, you know, there was very traditional forms of working, one job for life and all the rest of it. Young people coming out of university today, they will reckon to change their jobs many times in the course of their own career. And I think what we've got to do, the best way of government trying to focus on these problems now, is to make people more employable within the labour market and to give people the chance, you know, because of their own skills and adaptability, to get a fairer crack of the whip. Now, having said that, of course there are basic minimum standards at the workplace, and those we will introduce. But I think it's very important that we don't end up going back to the days of government thinking it can sort of run commercial companies, because I don't think the precedents for that are very happy.
Hold on, just before we leave the question of tax, which is what we were on, does anybody want to carry on with or put another question on the point about increasing the top rate of tax to help the underprivileged? The man there in the blue shirt with the red tie, yes.
Right. Scots consistently disagree with Mr. Blair's view on raising the top rate of income tax. Many polls have shown that most Scots feel that more money could be raised from income tax to actually distribute to lower income groups in society. Is this not just another example of Tony Blair and the Labour Party disregarding an area of Britain that consistently returns many Labour supporters?
Well, I have to say, you don't sound very Scottish to me, but anyway, we'll leave that aside for a moment.
Are you Scottish? Or?
I'm an Englishman who supports the SNP.
Right.
Right. Well, there's always a wide variety of people in such programs. No, I have to say to you, I think you're wrong there too, you know. I mean, I think if you go and talk to people in Scotland, they're not desperate to have their taxes increased. And I have to say to you, I mean, as a English person supporting the SNP, I'm just trying to wonder in my own mind who you're going to vote for in this election if you're living in England. But anyway,
I live in Edinburgh, incidentally.
Right, but you know, the plain fact of the matter is that the very worst thing that could possibly happen to Scotland is to be wrenched out of the UK. Separatism is not the answer to Scotland's problems, and the proposals that we're putting forward, you know, on young people and the health service and all the rest of it, I think are very, very popular in Scotland as well. And
but you're not going to let them raise taxes even if they want to, are you?
No, I'm saying that so far as the Labour Party is concerned, we've given a commitment on the basic and top rate of tax. What the SNP and other political parties want to stand on, that's a matter for them.
If you, just a matter of interest, if you were running the government in Westminster and with PR there was some other shade of government in Edinburgh that chose to raise taxes by 3 pence in the pound, would you from Westminster say, no, you can't do that, it's against Labour Party policy?
No, look, of course, the Parliament, when it's set up, has its own powers in Scotland, as indeed anybody that has its own powers do. All I can say is the Labour Party's commitment is absolutely clear, and I should think that it's probably time that the other parties said where they stood on this issue as well. But I think the vast majority of people in Scotland understand that, and I think that, you know, people have also got to remember, not merely in Scotland, but elsewhere in the UK, people had 22 tax rises under the Conservatives. I mean, they had, in breach of all Conservative promises, the largest tax increases in peacetime history. Now, I simply say we've got to ask more fundamental questions as to why the tax and spending bills have gone up. Why have they gone up? Because of economic and social failure. And the answer to that, I believe, is to tackle the root problem of that. That's why welfare to work is so important. Okay?
Laura Kennedy, who's a student from Hertfordshire. Laura Kennedy.
If the Labour Party still cannot commit themselves to a European monetary union at this late stage, how can they expect the public to make an informed decision on this, should it go to referendum?
Why can't Labour commit itself?
Because the time for making that decision, unless you rule it out as a matter of principle, unless you say there are no circumstances in which we ever go in, it's a perfectly respectable intellectual position. But if you say that, well, the debate ends now. Now, fair enough. But my position is not that, the Labour Party's position isn't that, neither is it the position, at least officially, of the Conservative Party. We both believe that it's sensible that our options remain open, but that if there is any question of going into a single currency in the next Parliament, if that arises, and I say if, there should be a referendum of the people. Now, if you ever get to the stage of a referendum, a government will have come to a view, and of course the debate can happen. What I think is important at the moment is that we decide, you know, the principles, the criteria by which such a decision will be made.
But they've all been decided, haven't they? I mean, that's what's so mysterious to many voters. The terms for the single currency have been set out. The list of countries that will qualify under the agreement have been set out. What else is there to wait for? Isn't it just that you and the Conservative Party, unlike the Liberal Democrats, don't want to show your hand until after the election?
No, it's not a question of not showing our hand, it's a question of not needing to or being sensible to take a decision at this stage.
But what's to negotiate?
But it's not a question of what's to negotiate. You have to look at what the economic circumstances are going to be at the time when this arises. Is it going to be sensible for Britain to participate or not? Is it going to be good for British jobs, British investment, British industry? Now, I've said, as you probably know, I think it is unlikely, highly unlikely, that Britain would participate under a Labour government in the first wave of single currency.
For economic reasons?
For economic reasons and also for reasons to do with politics as well. But I think what is important is to understand that the British people would have the final say on such a decision, but it is not sensible for us to rule it out, in my view, forever now. Because, can I just make this point, David? It is essential for people to realize, again, we are going to be affected by the single currency, whether we're in it or we're out of it. Now, it's very important, therefore, that we have some say in the negotiations that will shape it. And if Britain were to say never now, which is wholly unnecessary, then we wouldn't have that influence in those negotiations.
But what's left to shape? I'm sorry to press the point. What is there left to shape? All these other countries have said they're going to join. They've signed up. We've got the opt-out. What is there left to shape?
David,
what are you going to negotiate?
Yeah, but David, that doesn't happen until you decide whether the criteria have been properly met, whether it's not been fudged, what the economic circumstances and conditions are at the time. But these things have all got to be decided at the time. They're not decided now.
No, but you keep saying negotiate. What are you going to negotiate? It's clear-cut. We know about the single currency now. We know the countries that want it. We know the countries that qualify, including Britain.
No, with respect, it isn't clear, because it isn't clear what the economic circumstances will be at the time.
But you can't negotiate economic circumstances.
No, of course you're not negotiating.
But you keep saying you're going to negotiate.
Yes, but if you just listen to what I'm saying for a moment, sorry. What I'm saying,
trying to clarify.
No, and it's very, very helpful, let me say, but if I could just, if I just finish what I'm saying to you, what you will have to negotiate is whether the criteria have been met, whether there's any fudging of the criteria, whether there's any slippage there, whether the economic circumstances are in fact right for the single currency to go ahead or not. So, you know, what I simply say to people is there's no point in ruling it out forever now, but keep the option open with the referendum there as the guarantee that if there's any question of going in, the British people have the final say.
Laura Kennedy, you have your say.
I agree that you shouldn't have to make your mind up straight away, but what I'm saying is that the reason that you're not making your mind up is because it's such a complex issue. And if it's such a complex issue, how can you, I mean...
You mean if he can't make his mind up, how can you make your mind up?
Yeah, I think it's just ridiculous to expect the public to have the final say on something which is so complex when they haven't been in on the negotiations.
I don't, you know... Well, that, of course, in a sense, Laura, is an argument against having a referendum, because the thing's too complicated. But it's not its complexity that makes us keep the options open at the moment, both myself and Mr. Major. It is that we do not need to make a final decision now. We have decided the criteria that should be applied, but we do not need to make a final decision now. Neither is it sensible to do so. But I personally believe it is such a fundamental step of change in this country that it is right to have a referendum. That it is right if a government comes to the view that it is right to go into a single currency, the British people should have the final say, and that's true for ourselves and the Conservatives, and indeed I think for the Liberal Democrats as well.
The man in the centre there with the yellow tie on, in the fourth row.
I welcome
yes,
the view that the decision as to when and whether we join the RM is a difficult judgment to be taken in the short term. I want to look to the future, because we know that the Tories are completely divided on Europe, and we need a Prime Minister of vision. What is your vision of Europe in 20 years' time?
Well, my vision of Europe is where we cooperate as independent nation-states in the areas where it's in our common interest to do so, not a federal superstate where nation-states are submerged. And I believe that the essential requirement for Britain in Europe is to start trying to shape the European agenda. There are certain things that's tremendously in our interest to have done. For example, completing the single market in Europe. Now, that was a step of cooperation. It's taken some time ago, so that British manufacturers of goods and British providers of services can sell in that whole 360, 370 million market. That's in our interest, completion of the single market. I think the common agricultural policy is a scandal. I think we should be reforming the common agricultural policy. That is something that we want to achieve in Europe. We want to achieve the enlargement of Europe to bring in those emergent democracies, well, sometimes they have been emergency, but emergent democracies in the former Eastern Europe. All these things are extremely important to do, but we're only ever going to get a Britain that is standing tall in Europe if we have a Britain that is led by a Prime Minister with a united party. Divided and weak government does not lead to a strong presence for Britain.
All right, man in the front row here.
Could I ask, Mr. Blair, if you were successful on May the 1st, would you perhaps have a dream or a nightmare being governed by Jacques Santer, followed by Neil Kinnock?
Well now, sir, I have to point out to you there that, as I recall it, the man that was responsible for the appointment of Mr. Jacques Santer was one John Major, not Tony Blair. And
you could say he was responsible for the appointment of Neil Kinnock as well.
Well, that is true, and I'm delighted about that, however. And, you know, what is important... Look, I think that people find the whole European question very, very difficult, because people understand, at least I hope they do, some people don't, but I believe this, it would be folly for Britain to wrench itself out of the European Union altogether, to turn its back on Europe. I believe that. Some people don't, perfectly reasonable position, but I believe that. What people, however, are frightened of is that they see this great sort of, you know, motor of European integration being driven forward, and they think, it's divorced from what people are thinking. You know, it's not taking account of the way that people want Europe to develop. The only way of affecting that situation is to get Britain in there with some influence and clout. We haven't had that in the past few years. I mean, I cannot help mentioning the beef situation and BSE. I mean, you know, when I hear John Major tell me that, you know, that he's the only person that negotiates for this country in Amsterdam, well, I cannot believe the summit of statesmanship has been John Major and Douglas Hogg over BSE. I mean, I don't believe we've reached the summit of British achievement with those two handling matters.
Though you did, it has to be said, back them when they decided to boycott European Union negotiations at the beginning of the BSE crisis. You didn't say that's a ridiculous policy.
No, and it would have been wholly wrong if we had done so, because they would then have charged round saying Labour's undermining us when we're fighting for the country's interests. If the national interest is engaged, I will support the national interest.
Or even if they're cocking it up, in your view?
Well, they certainly were cocking it up, not merely in my view, but in the view of most people. But it is extremely important to remember we're a year on from the beef ban. And what have these people got done? Absolutely nothing. Now, 6 months ago, they promised that the beef ban would have been lifted. It isn't lifted. And I say, if that is the leadership that we've had in Europe, it's time for a change.
And let's have a change of subject. Andrew Clark is a student from Wakefield.
Mr. Blair.
Andrew.
Are you in favour of selection in schools?
I'm not in favour of going back to the 11 plus. I'm not saying that we should get rid of the existing grammar schools that are there. I don't think there's any point in waging some great war and vendetta against that. But I'm not in favour of returning to the situation where you divided children up into successes and failures at the age of 11. Now, the Conservative proposal, as you probably know, is to have, you know, what they call a grammar school in every town. That will simply create, in all the other schools that aren't grammar schools, secondary moderns in every town. We don't want to go back to secondary moderns in every town. Now, I think it is possible to modernise the comprehensive principle. To say, yes, of course children will learn and move at different abilities and at different speeds, but we can do that by, say, setting in different subjects in schools. We don't need to do it by dividing kids up and shoving them into different schools. The successors go here, those that don't succeed go to the other place. I think that would be a regressive step in education, and it would mean that the great failure of British education, you know, the great failure of British education, it educates 20% of the population well. We have got to educate 100% of our people well. That's why I don't believe it's sensible to return to the old system.
All right, man on the right-hand side there.
Mr. Blair, I'm myself a conservative, but I have to be fair. What I mean by fair, I just like to return on the complex issue, which is Europe
No, we're on. I'm sorry. No, we are on education.
Yeah,
but if you're a fair conservative,
if you've got a question on education,
my question is related to the conservative issue on education.
Yeah.
How do you intend, Mr. Blair, to encourage parents to participate more in education of the children?
How do you intend to, what was that?
To encourage parents to cooperate more in the education of their children. It's a very good question indeed. What we have suggested there is that schools should adopt what we call a homeschool contract between the parents and the school, so that the school knows what's expected of the school, and the parents know what's expected of the parents in the education of their children, so that we can deal with some of the problems that may arise, like truancy or indiscipline, homework the children should undertake, so that we can have a proper system of assessment of our children. I think there does have to be more parental involvement in the way that schools are run and in the way we organise our affairs, because we cannot leave education simply to the schools. The parents must be involved as well.
All right, woman in the front row here.
I'm a parent myself, and I'm extremely concerned about the term that you use about assessing a child in terms of their ability and SAT. I would like to ask you if you as a government would continue to support using SATs in schools, and to what end would you do that? Because from my point of view, it's much more holistic than that, in that it's about looking at good education across the board, and every child develops at a different stage. And if you're going to use them, to what end would you use them?
Well, we are committed to retaining that, I'm sorry to have to say to you, but you see, I think we've got to be careful here. Look, all children do develop in different ways. That is absolutely true. But you've got to make sure that children going through school do get the basics right. I mean, if they can't read and add up properly, and if they're not being taught, the very basic elements of a decent education, then actually their ability to develop in their own way is greatly restricted.
But it's also about, isn't it, having the appropriate level of teaching staff there, about looking at children much more than the national curriculum, and concentrating on the basics, yes. But what I feel SATS does is take away important time of teachers and concentrate on testing.
Standard assessment tests for children.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
it takes away.
Yeah.
What happens
it
is I could coach my child at 2.5 to do a developmental test, but that doesn't mean that she's got the basics. It only means that I'm good at coaching and she's good at remembering.
Yeah, but
I'm very
worried.
worried.
We haven't got much more time.
I do think that's quite important that we do get those basics right. I mean, my kids have just been doing SATs at the minute, and it puts pressure on everybody. But I do think that we've got a situation in this country where almost 50% of 11-year-olds have problems in numeracy and literacy. That isn't good enough for Britain. I mean, it really isn't good enough. And I think that by all means, good teacher is a teacher for life. Teaching is far more than about teaching by rote. We all know that. And you're absolutely right in saying you've got to develop the personality and the character of the child. That is all absolutely true. But unless you have a basic foundation there in what I would call the essential elements of a traditionally good education, then those children, when they get to a later stage, will always be trying to catch up. Okay. I really do believe that.
Frederick James, a student from Hereford. New question.
If Labour win by enough seats to ignore the Liberal Democrats, will you still believe in electoral reform?
Well, I've always said myself that I'm not persuaded of the case for electoral reform, but we've said that we would have a referendum on this issue, and the question to be decided by an electoral commission we will establish afterwards. And I think that is a matter, it's a debate that people have in this country about whether the system is fair or not. The reason I've never been persuaded of it, I have to say to you very frankly, is quite simple. I've never come across a system that is one that maintains the link between constituency and Member of Parliament, and that doesn't, under PR, end up with disproportionate power being wielded by small parties.
Like the Liberal Democrats?
Well, you called them a small party, I didn't. But, I mean, I think that, it's... I don't think...
I should have said what you hope would be a small party.
Well, we'll see in a week's time, won't we, sir?
But can I just ask you one question on this? Is your position, then, that if you become Prime Minister, you'll arrange an expensive referendum on changing the voting system without yourself endorsing it?
Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable to let people have a choice, but of course I would have a position on it. And it's essential also that we make sure that the very great concerns that people have about the electoral system are dealt with, and I understand those concerns, and I don't think there's anything wrong with change such as that being put to a plebiscite of the people. I simply have to say to you that, as I say, the great problem has always been, I think it was Margaret Beckett when she, if I can mention Margaret again to you, when she was looking at this for us some years ago, always used to say, well, look, the great thing everyone always wants is the fair electoral system. Now, I accept the inequities in the present electoral system, but the search for the fair electoral system can often be a lot more difficult than it sounds. What you've got to do is get the least unfair system.
Okay. The man with the waistcoat on there, the moustache.
I wonder if I could ask Mr. Blair, how many referendums does he intend to have if he gets into government? Is it going to be a referendum for every decision? You know, we have promised one in Wales, hopefully, on a Welsh Assembly, although we would like one on a Welsh Parliament. We have promised referendums now on EU. You know, how many are we going to have?
Well, what's the current total?
You know, just hang on a minute. You say that. I think it is entirely sensible that people in Scotland and Wales, if their system of government is going to be changed, have a referendum on it. And if the single currency arises, it's a big step of constitutional change. There should be a referendum on that, and ditto with the PR system. But I don't think there's anything to worry about. You're able to go out there and vote, and I think the vast majority of people in Wales and Scotland will welcome the fact that they're given a chance to have a say. And you know, if I may just say to you, sir, people keep going on about the politicians not involving the people. Well, we are involving the people, and I think the people should be grateful.
Okay. We're coming towards the end here. Christian Hamer, a student from Hereford.
Why has Labour changed its party colour to purple?
Can you just say it again? Sorry, we didn't get the microphone to you in time.
Why has Labour changed its party colour to purple? Is this to represent a lasting union between socialist red and Thatcherite blue?
Ah, well.
This is the, can I just show you? This is the new colour. Purple for 2/3 of the way, and then red at the bottom.
Well, first of all, David, I'm absolutely delighted that you've got our campaign literature with you, and I hope you keep that very close to your chest. We haven't changed the party colour at all, but, you know, we've got these advertisements up. I hope you've seen them. You know, Britain deserves better, and there are all sorts of different colours. And a little bit of colour in this election campaign wouldn't go amiss, is my general view.
Does that answer your question? Yes, the woman at the back there, in the second row from the back. You, yes.
Actually on education.
Well, I don't think we'd better go back to education. Let's just stick on general points about red and blue. I read, incidentally, in the paper tonight that you're reverting to red after the election. Is that true, or was that an...
That's a very naughty comment there, David. We are perfectly happy. I mean, look, this comes back to almost to where we began. I am absolutely 100%, as Labour leaders in the past have been, behind the principles of the Labour Party. Fair deal for ordinary people, social justice, a sense of community, a society that is compassionate. I stand for that now, as the Labour Party's always stood for it. But I have to say to you, with all due respect to those particularly conservatives who bang on about how we've ditched all our principles, that back in the days, when the Labour Party was unelectable, they used to say how terrible the Labour Party's unelectable. Now we've become electable, they say how terrible that Labour Party has become unprincipled.
All right. Well, we have... I'm sorry, we've come to the end of our hour. My thanks to all of you who've come from all over Britain to be here for this question session with Tony Blair. Thank you very much indeed, and of course to you, Mr. Blair. By this time next week, the polls will have closed, and we will be embarking on a long marathon session of programs bringing you the results of this election. So there won't actually be a question time, of course, next Thursday. And whatever the news, though, that it brings for Mr. Blair, question time will be back the following Thursday to debate the problems confronting the new government, of whatever complexion that may be. If you'd like to join us for question time after the election, this is the number to ring, 01818715252. We'll send you application forms if you give us a call. We're going to be in Manchester on the 29th of May. Later on, we're going to be here in London again and in Newcastle. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to join in. In the meantime, at the end of this, our last hustings question time, from all of us here and from the leader of the Labour Party, Mr. Tony Blair, good night.